Well, thank you all for joining us today. We're excited to host these two lunch sessions this week for the Technical Advisory Committee. This is really a continuation of some of the conversation we had last week as a TAC. We knew when we moved forward with that meeting that there were a number of TAC members who weren't able to attend. There were a lot of events happening around the state last Thursday, so we wanted to give both TAC members an opportunity to participate and engage who might not have been able to attend last week, and also just an opportunity to continue like the rich conversation that we had. These are open public meetings, so we do have members of the public here with us today. We will try to focus the meeting around TAC members, and we do have staff from VHCB and ANR who are joining us as well to have dialogue together. There will be opportunity for public comment at the end of the meeting. But if anyone does have questions throughout the meeting, feel free to pop those into the chat. And we want to keep these meetings flexible as well for the TAC and kind of respond to what TAC members might want or need out of these meetings. So we've set an agenda that's structured around the same structure we followed last Thursday, that follows kind of the same few sets of questions. But we can, again, be flexible and see, even between today and Friday, who's able to join, what are we wanting to discuss as a group. So we have an agenda that we'll follow, but we do also kind of leave space to spend more or less time on certain areas, depending on what the group is looking for from today. So we want to take a quick minute at the top to do introductions. We'll focus on, again, staff at BHCB and ANR and TAC members. I think we have a few TAC member subs who might be here today who are representing their organizations on behalf of another member who might not be able to join. So we'll ask those folks should be the ones who are introducing themselves, but we, again, will have opportunity for public comment at the end. And at that point, we'd ask the public to state your name, introduce yourself, and provide any additional feedback you'd like to give. So I'll start off. I'm Annie Decker. I work at BHCB. I've been really involved in phase 2, this kind of conservation plan effort, part of the Act 59 process. Really excited to see you all here today. And maybe I'll kick it over to Isaac.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Isaac. I am VHCB's Conservation Stewardship Director, and I've been engaged with Act 59 with Annie and Trey. I'll pass it to Trey.
Hey, Martin. Here in Montpelier at the VHCB office, but I live in Calais. I'm the Conservation Director here, and just so happy to welcome you all. I think, Annie, also, we don't have very many people here today, so after TAC members say hello, maybe members of the public could just say their names too, just to introduce themselves really quickly. But Liz is one more VHCB staff person Liz Gleason is one more VHCB staff person, not to have any more fun with that. But go ahead, Liz, if you want to say hi.
Got it. Hi, everyone. Liz Gleason. I manage our Farm and Forest Viability Program here at VHCB, which is a business planning program for working lands businesses, and our Rural Economic Development Initiative, which helps small communities access big dollars to do their community-based economic development projects. Nice to see all of you.
Thank you. And I'm going to suggest maybe that we hear just a quick introduction from Chris Castano, and then Gannon, and then Kate.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Castano. I work for the Maine Woods Company in Portage Lake, Maine, and I've been in the forest products industry here in the state of Vermont for close to 40 years.
Thanks, Chris.
Hi, everybody. Gannon Osborne. I'm the Director of Resilient and Connected Lands here at the Nature Conservancy in Vermont. Great to see everybody.
Kate Warner, Conservation Director for Trust Public Land. Shelby Sems, who's on the TAC, was unable to join today as she is traveling out of state.
Great. Thank you for being here, Kate, on Shelby's behalf. Let's see, Liz Thompson, and then Emily, then Cheryl, then Zach, then Carrie. That's the order on my screen. And then we're going to get going.
Liz Thompson, ecologist associated with wildlands, woodlands, farmlands, and communities, just a member of the public observing. Thanks.
Thank you. And John Kress also. Sorry, John, you're at the top of my screen. I missed you there. But Emily, go ahead. Then Cheryl, Zach, Carrie, John.
Sounds good. Emily Anderson, Policy Manager at the Vermont Center for Eco Studies, and just here to listen to updates.
Welcome.
Hi, Cheryl Van Apps, 21-year resident here in Essex Town, watching development taking place on steep slopes and wetlands in my area. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us. Zach, did you want to say hi?
Oh, sure. Sorry about that. Zach Porter with Standing Trees, and just a member of the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Carrie.
Carrie Thomas, Executive Director of the Northern Forest Canoe Trail, listening in, wanting to learn what's going on.
Nice to see you again. And John.
Yeah, John Kress, live in Dorset, Vermont. I was involved in the Vermont Biodiversity Alliance quite heavily. I'm particularly interested in catching up on 59 because I think this idea needs to spread across the United States, if not the world. So I'm in touch with other conservation organizations in California, as well as the Conference of the Parties of the Convention on Biological Diversity, which started this whole thing. And Vermont is just an outstanding example. You should all know that. So I just want to find out and keep up on it and find out more about what's happening.
Well, we're glad to have you here. We're glad to have everybody here. What I'm going to do, folks, is we do have some slides to help guide us today, but we're not going to keep slides up the whole time. We're going to kind of we'll look at slides to orient, and then as we have discussion, open it up to TAC members, and we can just have our discussions, and then we can put the slides back up. But I'll share my screen. I do have a couple of quick updates that I wanted to just kind of run through for everybody at the top of the hour here. Can you see my screen there? Is it nice, large size? Okay, so we're this is, I think, the most important thing to just do a couple of quick updates here off the top. One is that, here we are at the top, the first bullet there in the week of before the Thanksgiving holiday. Both today and Friday, we're opening up the Zoom link over the lunch hour to engage with TAC members, continuing our meeting from last week, and to hear from members of the public as we finish up. We have the next full TAC meeting will be the week of December 15th, and TAC members, you should have seen a doodle poll from Annie with times to weigh in on Wednesday afternoon, Thursday, and Friday morning. We're trying to find the time that works best for VHCB, ANR, and members of the TAC. So looking ahead after that, though, we have a really busy January planned. People, not only are people returning to the State House, and that's going to make all of our lives a little bit busier, but we have the next round of regional listening sessions, which will be starting in the middle of the month and continuing into February. We'll be launching some sector-specific outreach. We talked about the potential for some small, what we call mini grants to support organizations who want to facilitate conversations with their members and constituencies about this and provide feedback to this process. That we'd be very happy to support that. We need to work the details about that out, and we'll come back with more at the TAC meeting in December. And then, of course, we're going to need TAC members. We'll probably meet every 4 to 6 weeks over the course of January through March, as we're working on polishing the framework that we're working on, the objectives, pathways, and actions that comprise the bulk of the report. By the end of March, what we're hoping is that we'll have, or at least we'll be honing in on a complete framework with those objectives, pathways, and actions draft, but complete, that we can then socialize further with the TAC and then with the April regional listening sessions. In April and May, though, we're adding on the last piece. So I know there's a lot of details flagged here, but the final kind of piece of this after we develop that framework is an implementation timetable with the priorities for action between now and 2030 and between now and 2050. So there'll be a little bit of a Gantt chart overlap as we're finalizing the framework, but beginning to think about what are the ways that we prioritize? What are the resources available, resources needed? What are the most urgent actions across the board? And of course, still June 30th is the day that the deadline for which we're planning to submit the report. So just want to pause for a second and see if folks have any questions about that that quick overview of the timeline. All stuff we covered last week, but and all stuff that should be on the portal and will be in continuing communications. So if there are no questions, what I'll do is hand this back over to Annie, and I'm going to advance to the next slide to sort of get into the next portion of this.
Thank you, Trey. So to kick things off today, and this is again kind of similar to the flow we followed last week with the TAC, we went through just a little visioning exercise together as a group, asking TAC members and some staff who are in the room to reflect on what might success look like under the Vermont Conservation Plan. We had 3 questions that we posed to the group. In the room that day, we also kind of had worksheets that asked these same questions and gave TAC members some time to sit with those questions. We're a little more crunched for time today, so this will be a little more kind of rapid fire on the spot, but we do encourage TAC members, and I think even members of the public, to think on these questions and to send us your thoughts. You know, you're welcome to share what comes to you today, but also to send anything in writing after the fact to us in an email. We are planning on, in December, reflecting back as a group, kind of what we discuss in this exercise today. But just going through a group exercise right now of talking through, you know, if we're feeling optimistic about the Vermont Conservation Plan, what do we imagine it can accomplish for Vermont or for the communities that we each represent? What would it look like if the plan truly meets its vision and goals for your work, your organization, or again, the communities that you serve? And what do you hope this plan makes possible for Vermont and for conservation moving forward? So I'll drop these questions in the chat, but this is a time now where I think we'll take the presentation down and just kind of talk to each other as a group. I am putting those questions in the chat right now.
While you do that, Annie, I'll just welcome first, you know, Gannon, Kate, Chris. You know, Gannon and Chris had a chance to interact with these questions last week, so we're wondering if you have further thoughts. Kate, you and Shelby weren't able to be present, but if there's thoughts that you want to share now, I think we're a small enough group now too, Annie, that if other people have ideas or questions about this, we could just share as a group here. Let's see where we are in about 5-10 minutes, but if people want to keep going, but we can continue to tick through the other questions that we talked about last week too, if this isn't of great interest. So
that sounds great. Thank you, Trey.
So again, Gannon, Chris, or Kate, if there's any further reflections or anything you want to add to the record today, knowing you can also supplement in writing.
I'll leave space for Chris and Kate since I was in the room last week.
Just from my hip, I hope that we can figure out new funding sources and end up with a fully functioning ecological system in Vermont over the long term. And that Trust Public Land can help us get there.
Thanks, Kate.
I'll just add.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was particularly excited about the implementing VCD report that came out in March, and Trust for Public Land is actively using that prioritization to make sure we are more focused on conservation opportunities in underrepresented biophysical regions and underrepresented natural communities and systems. That data and prioritization was really great, and applaud that.
Thanks, Kate.
And I'll just add briefly, you know, my concern is just that, you know, sound forest management remains compatible with the conservation strategies that this process will flesh out. So that's all I have.
Thanks, Chris.
You've abbreviated overview of what I think I said last week, but building upon what a bunch of folks and also what Kate and Chris just shared, but what a bunch of folks said in the room last week of wanting to see this bring the conservation community together and in alignment on achieving our goals and in working together to do so. Also, bringing innovation and efficiencies and new programs and funding opportunities. I think all of those will be needed if we are to increase the pace of conservation across the state to meet our goals. And then finally, really focusing on biodiversity protection and on implementing Vermont conservation design. I think that is a clearly called for in the statute, and I think that is something we can work to center in our conservation work moving forward. And it's VHB appreciate you all highlighting that as one of the core objectives of the framework thus far, the Centering Vermont Conservation Design. And so really looking to see that carried forward in the plan. And yeah, excited for those opportunities.
Thanks, Gannon. Appreciate that. As Trey said, we are a small enough group, and I think we have at least a couple more minutes we could spend on this topic. I encourage, if anyone else wants to share out at this point, please feel comfortable doing so.
Or Cheryl, go ahead. And I'm just going to reiterate what Andy said is like, we're happy to get emails.
Cheryl and then Liz?
Can you
Cheryl,
hear me?
did you have? Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. I'm friends with several Abenaki folk, so I'm wondering if we can collaborate with their community needs as for access to lands. Folks with disabilities, I would hope we would promote their access to trails, scenic places for their enjoyment and visitation. So transportation will be something to look at so they can access those sites. I would hope we would increase the amount of respect the Vermont public has for the land, for wildlife habitat existence and ability to thrive. Thanks.
Thank you, Cheryl. Liz?
Thanks, Sandy. I'm not yet sure if this is sort of my position as a staff person or as a member of the public. So let's say member of the public, since I'm still getting caught up to speed on everything the TAC has been doing. Does that sound like it makes sense?
Absolutely.
Great. Well, one of the things that I'm really hopeful for and what I hope that this plan can accomplish is that it sort of recognizes where we are in history and sort of the political context of and like how people are doing in Vermont right now. There's a housing and homelessness crisis. Kids are sleeping outside. There's a climate crisis. We're getting flooded. Like, I think this plan really needs to be centered in like supporting people, supporting communities, supporting biodiversity of all kinds, and making it like, I'm definitely a proponent with my public hat on of making this plan really holistic and integrating as much as we possibly feasibly can in what is a tight timeline. So that's a big priority of mine, and I'm really hoping we can figure out how to include food production and local food to meet our food security and resiliency goals. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Liz. Carrie?
Thank you. I definitely appreciate what the previous speakers have said. I just want to sort of appreciate also and acknowledge the nexus that ecological health and human health and also like conservation and the landscape just sort of is the backdrop for everything we are and everything we represent and everything we do in Vermont. My work is clearly in outdoor recreation, but that's only viable if we have healthy watersheds, and healthy watersheds only happen with healthy landscapes. I want to make sure that people have access to the land, because I think if people don't experience the wonders of that landscape, they don't fall in love with it and they don't have any impetus to protect it. So I applaud the work that you're doing, and I want to make sure that you're working to include people and place and the economic health of the state in the whole conversation.
Thanks so much, Carrie. Oh, John, I see your hand.
Yeah, again, as a member of the public, I just would like to emphasize what Liz said. I think it could not be more important time for a state like Vermont to be taking a leadership role in this. As we see the federal efforts at environmental production being dismantled on a daily basis, it's all being handed down to the states, and we could not let this slip right now. So I think coming together and making sure that we see that this is not only good for Vermont, but it's good for the country and the world, we have to just keep that up. So I'm very pleased that we are making progress, and think we have to keep going. There's no choice about it. We have to do it.
Thanks so much, John. Liz?
Just want to reiterate big support for what you're doing, and particularly centering Vermont conservation design. I think that's critical, and really glad to see that, particularly the first item, pathways of expanding ecological representation, like Kate said earlier. I think that's really, really important, and glad to see that in there. That's all.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you everyone who's shared. Again, please, if you have more thoughts on this or want to send us some thoughts in writing, please do so. We'll have another similar conversation Friday afternoon, so you can join us again. I think we are going to move on to our next topics, but I did just want to share, we concluded this conversation on Thursday with some remarks from Gus Seelig, our executive director, who also really touched on our vision as an organization for this plan is it's very big tent. It's meeting the biodiversity and community resilience components of the act. It's centering VCD, but also centering humans and what does it take to maintain that long-term durable conservation. It's stewardship and all of the people power that it takes to do that work. It's access and equity. So we will have our next conversation will be about the scope of the plan. I do see one more hand. Zach, if you want to take a minute and share your thoughts, and then we'll move on, I think, to the next piece of our conversation today.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I just want to say really briefly that I'm grateful that you're asking the public to weigh in on these questions here, but at the meeting last Thursday, this question was not asked of the attendees of the meeting. And so it's wonderful that you're asking the additional folks in the room here, to be clear. But there were a number of people who came to the meeting last Thursday who are not here in this meeting, members of the public who did not get a chance to respond to this. So I just want to note that. And I guess I'll just say, I am optimistic about the Vermont Conservation Plan if the plan actually centers the legislation and as Liz mentioned a moment ago, centers Vermont conservation design. But I think, more than centers, I think centers is kind of a loosey-goosey term. I mean, that's the core of the legislation. And so anyways, I appreciate the public meeting here and chance to weigh in for a second.
Thanks, Zach. And I will thank you for your comments. I think we are still working through how to incorporate as much feedback as we can as we kind of move this process forward. Glad to have a small group today where we have this opportunity to have dialogue. And at the last meeting, we did have public comment right after this section, and we I think we did encourage the public to provide comment that they wanted, but also reflect on these questions. But perhaps that could have been clearer, and we'll definitely keep that in mind moving forward. But thank you, Zach. And I think with that, we will move on to our next section.
Great. I think we've got some slides for this. If someone wouldn't
Let me
mind.
share the deck again, Isaac, for you.
Thank you.
And
Beautiful. So as Annie was mentioning, and a couple people have touched on, the last TAC meeting, we had a conversation about scope. We're currently at the point where we have issued our initial report that shows the objectives and pathways, and are now looking forward to actions that would be developed under those objectives and pathways. And as we look towards that work, I think the scope of the plan is an important point to spend some time on. So the legislation has a vision, which is shown on the screen and is quite broad. I'm not going to read it to you, but it's a pretty holistic vision. And then it has some specific conservation goals, with conservation being defined in the legislation as mostly permanent conservation, with some caveats around 2050. But the conservation plan itself asks us to write a plan to achieve both the vision and goals, and then a couple other specific aspects, which actually I think are best shown on the next slide. So the scope of the plan does ask for a comprehensive strategy for achieving the vision and goals, using the implementation methods for achieving the goals using Vermont conservation design. But it also asks specifically to provide recommendations as it relates to equity and access to protected lands and land-based enterprises, and then just recommendations for achieving the broad vision as implemented by ANR and VHCB. And so VHCB does read that to be a mandate to write a broad, holistic, and inclusive plan. And we have shared with TAC members previously and with the public at the last meeting VHCB's memo on sort of our understanding of scope and what we think needs to be included in the plan as defined by Act 59. And so we provided that in advance, and to those that didn't have it, the non-TAC members, I've just posted it in the chat, so you can read that if you'd like. But we have the questions as shown on the screen. After the vision-based conversation that we just had, does the scope that VHCB has provided as laid out in the legislation fit that vision? Does it strike the right balance between ambition and practicality? Are there any gaps or things that feel out of sync? And so I think a similar structure to last time, we can take down this slide and throw those questions into the chat, and then maybe start with our TAC members, a couple of which have had an opportunity to think about this. And so I say to start with any TAC members, any additional thoughts or initial thoughts around scope?
I just dropped that in the chat for everybody.
Since I was at the last meeting and prepared for this, or somewhat remember the conversation, I can go first and give some others some time to think. Really appreciate VHCB putting out a pretty holistic and broad tent approach, trying to include many different aspects of our conservation work in the scope. My one concern with that, and my one thought and piece of recommendation, would be to try to be as focused as possible, because I think that will help us to create an actionable plan that can be put to good use across the state. The act, as I read it, starts with that broad vision, but then does help to guide us through the goals to a smaller set of permanent legal land protection and durable land protection measures. And so I think it would behoove us to focus as much as possible so that we don't have this broad behemoth of a plan, but we do have a focused, actionable plan that helps us meet our 30 by 30 and 50 by 50 goals called for in the Act. And that's not to say that we should ignore all of the other important components of our conservation work, but as much as possible, point to other plans and other efforts already underway doing work in those areas. So focusing this on a specific subset of the conservation work in the state while also referencing those other plans that can help to fill in the gaps in some of those other areas. Just my thoughts. Thanks.
Thanks, Gannon. That definitely speaks to that ambition versus practicality. How do we have something that's implementable when this is all said and done? So appreciate that. Any other TAC members? Okay, I see you unmuted.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of expand a little bit on that, the forest partnership, we all met with Vermont Fish and Wildlife a week and a half ago to talk about the new revision of the Wildlife Action Plan. And one thing we discussed was, there are like 9 major plans that all, the climate plan and food access and the Wildlife Action Plan and forest futures, and that there's so much overlap between some of the visions and goals of those plans that it would really behoove us to like have someone or AI, I hate to say that, but look at kind of what actions overlap and where is the biggest bang for our buck that gets us the most progress across all of those plans and like focus our energies on some of those. So like there just seems to be so much effort and work put into all of these separately without kind of enough looking at them holistically, and then but like then pulling out which ones are specific to Act 59 and conservation plan within that, just so that we don't have additional plans to just sit on the shelf once all of this great work has been done.
It's super interesting. It feels like you're almost saying two things, and I'm trying to tease it out in my head a little bit. And I'm not going to try to do that live, but you've definitely got my wheels turning, so I appreciate that, Kate. Chris, did you have anything? Members on? No.
Yeah, I have no comment at this time.
Okay. Well, then I think we can open it up to everyone in the room. I know some of you likely are just opening up. I haven't seen this memo previously, sort of digesting it in real time. So we recommend live, raw thoughts and longer written thoughts later as well, of course.
Well,
yeah,
that's okay.
Yeah.
I think people naturally what we have found is that this question of scope comes up sort of across the board for people, and even what people said about their vision above and last week touched on scope. Some of the TAC members and guests touched on that already today. So I think we've heard a lot on this. Again, if people have articulations they'd like to share, we're happy to hear them. But maybe what I'm going to do is just go just to the next to the point in the meeting where we left off last week, where we didn't have as much time. And if you all happen to be the same people who were with us on Friday, we can even just pick up from here or there. But we have about 12 minutes till I want to kind of stop conversation and allow members of the public who have any pre-prepared kind of comments or questions that they want to give us to end with that. But moving forward, just first I'll show you this. In addition to that really cool photo down in southern Vermont there, looking ahead, right? That's what we're doing, trying to find our path. But what we talked about last week is how the plan nests. So first of all, everybody has seen, and what's published online right now is kind of the first two nesting dolls worth of work. So you have three broad objectives on conservation and communities, centering VCD for ecological health, and then the kind of capacity and innovation. And then we've put potential pathways underneath there, and people are reacting to those and giving us feedback, and we appreciate those comments. Again, where we're headed next is what are the actions and sub-actions that manifest this into measurable, trackable, implementation. The other thing we wanted to note, and I think this gets to Gannon, to your question, and to people who've asked about how to make this practical and achievable, is that we feel like the legislation compels us to provide a framework, a recommended framework to the legislature that touches across the full planning mandate that we see in the Act, including all three of those objectives. We know that we have resource constraints and that we have time constraints and partnership constraints. So how we prioritize for 2030 and how we prioritize for 2050 are upcoming conversations. And that's like the work of the springtime to really flesh that out. So just a reminder on that. But what we wanted to end with today, at least for the last 10 minutes here, is again where we left off last week, is people either were thinking earlier or shared a vision for how this plan manifests and what it does. So, do you see your vision within the objectives and pathways that we've already laid out there? Is there something about your vision that doesn't fit in that framework? Could the ideas that you have for the success of this plan, do you think more should be added or adjusted in the framework? And what do you want most to see in terms of actions in the plan? So beginning to think, okay, so how do you describe, like, people complimented or cited the part of Objective 2 that speaks to diversifying investments across biophysical regions. So, what actions do we take to manifest that? How do we track progress against that? Other people want to see that we successfully increase access, especially for, let's say, the example that was given for the disabilities community. So what actions manifest that, and how do we progress? And then to add on the nuance that people talked about, are there other plans that are already doing that we should kind of incorporate by reference or signal by reference that work is happening? So let me put those. This is the last slide we're going to show, so I'm just going to copy and paste these into the chat, and I will take them. Oh, you got it?
I just did that, Trey. Yep. They're in there.
All right, so I'm going to stop the share and open it up. We've got about 8-10 minutes, and then we'll take any separate public comment. Again, and Chris, Kate, any ideas today that you want to share on actions within the scope?
One thing that hopefully TPL and ANR will be working on together in the near future is a data-based outdoor access gap, which involves both recreation and access to natural areas across the state. And that would be within kind of the first objective and the first pathway, second pathway, so increasing equitable access. So we hope, that in kind of partnership with VCD, but different than VCD, can be used for both future conservation organizations, trail groups, municipalities, and the state on making sure we have equitable access across the state.
That's a good example about how an action can be gathering more information or developing a map or database. Gannon or Chris?
My
Yeah.
apologies. Sorry, Gannon. My apologies. This is
go for
this is the first time I'm seeing some of these questions, so I'm not prepared. But I will come Friday with I'll attend Friday's session with more comments then. So my apologies.
And if it's helpful to flesh them out in writing and send them along as well, Chris, please feel free to do so. We're just looking for ideas of things that would fit under each pathway or under the pathways that, feel most important. Like, yeah, Gannon, go ahead.
Yeah, it's I'm just trying to I'm trying to think of the order. We're going from what the scope, which just felt kind of more action oriented, focusing on the actions, to this, which feels like going back to the objectives and pathways. So trying to orient myself here. But I think objectives and pathways wise, really appreciate what VHBU and A&R have done to design the three objectives, five pathways under each, which seems to my reading, encompass the many conservation values that our conserved lands and conservation efforts work to advance across the state. And while also centering Vermont conservation design, one of our objectives with the five pathways underneath that specifically focused on implementing Vermont conservation design. So really appreciate that framework, and also the highlighting of the objective focused on conservation capacity and stewardship, new funding, new programs and policies. I think that's all really important as well. So appreciate you kind of making this framework to then center actions under. And then I think the real question, going back again to the previous question, is how you create the scope, the sideboards for the actions that fall within that framework. And I think that's what you're asking us here today. So I think the framework sets us up in a good place for success, and now it's our job or your job to set up those sideboards.
Good job that we accept, but we also would love to, in writing or on Friday, if TNC has been thinking about actions and sub-actions that nest under the pathways, to share those out and share with your colleagues. And, we want to show when we bring our draft to the December TAC meeting how, people's comments and questions align, and like where do questions and things show up? Is there a lot of support for certain actions and sub-actions, or while others need more discussion? Those are the kinds of things we'd love to hear from folks. And that's kind of towards the end of this set of questions, Gannon, is sort of like number 4 is like, what really needs to be in there to make it hum. But Kate, go ahead. It looks like you're about to say something.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have like 4 pages of actions that I don't think it's worthwhile to go through right now. So in preparation for our forest partnership meeting this Friday, that then we will be bringing to BHB and ANR. So I just mentioned one of them, but there are many other ones that we would love to discuss with all of you guys in the future.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And your discretion is the soul of your wit, or whatever that saying is. How about others? Liz, John, Carrie, Cheryl, Zach, Emily. Any quick thoughts? Yeah, go ahead, Cheryl.
I'm going to just speak in generalities. I don't know. I'm not a policy wonk or anyone who understands funding, but I'm thinking funding is key. If we could create something that's sustainable, it's not reliant upon political environment. There's nothing more important than the health of our planet. So whatever we could do, let's hope we can make it long-term to reinforce those values rather than short-term gains. I'm thinking in terms of perhaps tax incentives or some other. We may need to think outside the box to bring to create this. That's all I'm going to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Don, you're not on mute. Can I call on you?
Sure. Well, I guess a couple of questions, and I don't know if this is immediately applicable to this subject, but one is I'm still unclear how the goals of 2030 meet or interact with the goals of 2050. It seems like 2030 is making up that 3% is not going to be quite the same challenge as making up the additional 20%. in the next 20 years. And I was just wondering if there is a plan for that. If there is, I haven't seen it and I'd like to see it, but it could be just my ignorance. And the second is, speaking for the public, is how is all this being communicated in an effective way to the public, not just the technical committee, but to the public? Are you guys getting out enough? I mean, I'm trying to do stuff here in Southern Vermont, but I'm just wondering what's the plan to keep the public engaged in this as you move forward, or as Vermont moves forward. So those are just a couple of thoughts from this one public guy.
It's John. I think it makes sense to just quick respond to those two questions, and then if there's no other kind of topical questions, or even if there are, we're gonna sort of generally open up to members of the public for any comments that you have. But number one is that we'll really be focusing in on the path to 2030 and the path to 2050 in the springtime. We understand the goals a little bit differently, and the mechanisms for protection are broader, like Isaac said, for 2050, but kind of thinking about how we use that extra 20 years to both do lots more permanent legal conservation, because it says it should be largely or mainly, I think is what the statute says, if I remember correctly, permanent conservation, but allowing long-term durable contracts. So we've been looking at what kinds of mechanisms those are, whether they're, how does UVA fit with that or not? How do regulatory programs fit with that or not? How do other programs fit with that or not? So in order to think about the 2050 goal, we have to really think about what are the other new programs and tools that help us get there. That's what we'll sort of prioritize, is bolstering those programs there. And then your second question is that in January, we're both going to be doing more generally open public listening sessions around the state in the 4 quadrants and in Montpelier, as well as asking all, the partners on the TAC, but others too, if they want to host events for public to provide feedback and questions and comments on this draft framework. So lots more coming up.
Okay, thank you. I'll help in any way I can. I'm sure there's a lot of people that will help in any way they can.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And I see Cheryl's comment about wanting to, how do we broadcast this? This is information that we've been sending to people on VHCB's listserv, also on we have a public portal, but we've asked the conservation commissions to widely distribute this, and conservation districts. So we're getting this out, Cheryl, to as many people as we can, but like almost for every time we do that, there are people who say, I just learned about this. So we're clearly, any ideas about how to do that are important. Others who want to leave us with a question or comment today before we wrap up at 1? Yeah, Carrie.
This is probably beating a dead horse in some way, but as we move towards having 50% of the landscape of Vermont in conservation, which I think is an awesome and important goal for so many reasons, how are we making sure that leaves space for the human environment and the human economy, and it's housing and all of the other issues that are plaguing us today. And I suspect that that's part of the conversation, but I'm curious where that is in all of this.
Thank you. Before responding to any comments now, I'm going to make sure everybody has a chance to talk, but then we can open up some of these questions if folks want. But I see a hand up from Zach. Certainly, though, Carrie, that's on our mind.
Thank you, Trey and Annie, for this opportunity to join you all today. I want to just, after the meeting last week, something that struck me that I want to share with you all now is that, and it was brought up earlier today, Vermont has many plans. The Forest Future Strategic Roadmap was just mentioned. That was a very in-depth, funded process to map out the future of the wood product industry here. Having attended many of those meetings, I know that there were very few, if any, questions asked about where do wildlands fit into the picture. And I am concerned about the double standard that I'm kind of witnessing in the draft framework report and in kind of the direction that the implementation of Act 59 has been going, which is that Act 59, as we talked about at the public meeting last week, doesn't seek to address all of the myriad legitimate, really, important, critical concerns that we're dealing with here in Vermont. It seeks to address our biodiversity crisis and our resilience crisis in the face of climate change. And we absolutely need to address all of these other issues, as a commenter spoke about earlier, shaping that ecologically functional landscape, which is envisioned by Vermont conservation design, serves all of us, serves all of those other needs that we have in this state. But what I think is really worrisome to me is the prospect of burdening the Act 59 process, which has a pretty specific goal, right? There's nothing in the legislation that prohibits this conservation plan from being far broader, but nor was there anything prohibiting the Forest Future Strategic Roadmap from including recommendations for wildland protection, or for housing affordability, or for healthcare for all Vermonters, all of which we should be addressing as a state. What my point is here is that we have a chance to do something really important for biodiversity, for resilience, for creating that ecologically functional landscape, which we know is central to all of these other goals. I hope that as a result of doing a really good job on the conservation plan for Act 59, we can then take a step back and put all of these pieces together. But I am worried about, especially with the time that we have remaining for getting this done, trying to address all of these other issues in this Act 59 conservation plan seems, I'm not even sure how to describe it. It's a little bit crazy to me to think that this could be something that we incorporate all of these disparate plans into, and why we would choose Act 59 as the vehicle for that. So again, this is not to criticize in any way whatsoever the importance of all of those other issues out there, which I stand in solidarity alongside, but I am really worried about how the goals, the legislative intent of Act 59 might get subsumed and become a kind of second class to all of these other interests that are important and that we need to address, and that I hope we will address in time once we have a really solid biodiversity and resilience plan in place. That's what Act 59 asks us to do. So I'll just put out one idea for moving that idea forward, something that's missing right now from the conversation, which is how are we going to make sure that all of the areas that meet the minimum patch size, preferred minimum patch size for old forest management in Vermont conservation design, how do we make sure that those areas all get mapped? All the possible areas that would meet the preferred minimum patch size for old forests in all biophysical regions across Vermont, so that we know as the conservation community, where should we focus our efforts to protect old forests, private land or public land? That would be just one of many steps that we could take. And of course, we'll provide more things in comments, but that's one idea to add to the list of actions right now. So thanks.
Thank you. Kate Warner.
Yeah, following on Zach's point, I want to clarify kind of what I meant earlier about all the other plans and the wildlife action plan and the climate plan and et cetera, et cetera. I didn't mean, because I didn't speak clearly about it. I didn't mean that we should incorporate all of the goals from all those plans into this. I agree with Zach that that is not what we should be doing. We should be focused on the goals of the conservation plan and everything within Act 59 as stated, but that we need to reference those plans on some of the overlapping goals that those plans address. That, we don't need to reinvent the wheel on everything that has been done in those plans, and we can talk about the economic future of the forest industry is already in the Forest Futures Plan. We don't need to address that in our conservation plan. There are implications of the Forest Future Plan that affect our conservation plan, and our conservation plan affects the Forest Futures Plan and the economic future of the timber industry. But I agree with Zach, that's not the purpose of the conservation plan. So I agree that it should not be too broad and address all of the problems we are facing in Vermont, that there are other plans for that, and that they should be focused really on conservation. So and I don't know if that was a clarification or not, or if I went down to a deeper hole, but
Clarification. No, that was a very good clarification. I think it's well, actually, let me be quiet and see. Does anybody else want to answer, Kate or Zach? I have a quick thought that I would love to end on, but I don't need to end on it yet.
Well, could I just say one last thing about that?
Of course.
I
Thank you,
agree
John.
with Zach. I think there's so many distractions going on in the world today, not just in Vermont, but so many distractions economically, socially, politically, that it's very easy for environmental things to get pushed to the background. And I think Vermont has to make sure that we don't let that happen here. So I would say focus on Act 59 in terms of the core stuff of what it's supposed to do.
Looks like one more hand, Liz.
Thanks. I'll just offer that having been part of the farm to plate sort of agriculture and food systems planning process, I think it's very possible to have a plan that is both focused and a big tent and includes really broad and really, really specific action items. So I know that once you get into the details, that's when it gets like really hard to figure out what's in and what lives somewhere else. But I think while we're talking at this like really high level theory point, they don't need to be like mutually exclusive. And I'm not saying that I think the food systems plan is perfect, but I do think it's one plan that really tried to be like big tent and hyper specific at the same time.
And that's a great segue to how I wanted to end if there's nothing else, which is go ahead, Cheryl.
I wanted to just insert that my own situation is not. I was interested in hearing more of the preferred minimum patch. My area has small patches, so I want to know how to preserve those because they too are corridors for our wildlife, but they're being set aside for development, it seems. So more inclusivity of like smaller patches too, perhaps, maybe.
That's definitely something that we've heard is that, and that's one of the values VHCB shared through GOT last week is that we want to meet landowners where they are and develop innovations that where we can work with municipalities or other local trusts to do more of those smaller parcel that smaller parcel conservation work that does provide a lot of connectivity or support riparian corridors or support the wetlands and floodplains that protect our infrastructure in downtown. So I think there's that's definitely part of our thinking. And I think more broadly, I think we welcome this conversation and this exact topic is like how do you and we feel like the legislation, the mandate that we shared earlier, the screen that showed those 4 planning goals, it does say some pretty broad things. And so again, like I said, we feel like the framework, objectives, pathways, and actions needs to broadly cover what the legislature asked us to report on with recommendations, but that we also can be hyper-focused on the priorities for implementation, and that's the next piece of this once the framework is complete. So just just cut and paste from that one section of the planning goals is we look at this and we just say, wow, like the legislature is asking us to think really broadly across the mission and provide those recommendations. So that's how we're planning to address that is both by being complete in the framework itself, the objectives, pathways, actions, and being specific and focused in the recommendations for 2030 and for 2050. So I'm going to wrap us up there for today. You are all welcome to join us again on Friday. We'll give as much time as notice as possible of the date for a December TAC meeting. And we're hoping well in advance of that to have both shared with the TAC and posted what the next draft looks like, where we begin to incorporate actions for people to react to and provide more specific feedback on. I know that'll be easier. So thank you all. Good to see you. Your commitment, as always, is appreciated. And if you just want to come back in writing, I emphasize that's fine, but we love to see a robust conversation. Take care.
Thank you, Trey. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Take care.